Women Up Radio, designed to facilitate women's empowerment, improve your career, develop your talents, incorporate your passions, achieve fulfillment and success.
Hello, this is Women Up Radio, supporting Empower Women. And today we're talking about women in public leadership and the evolution of local government. I'm joined in the studio by my guest, Dr. Jane Roberts, who has an extensive background in local government and in health. Councillor for the London Borough of Camden for 16 years, council leader from 2000 until 2005, Jane was appointed DBE in 2004 for services to local government. Now chair of the think tank NLGN, which is the new local government network, Jane started her career as a medical doctor, and she worked for many years as a hospital consultant in Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. So, fabulous career, very interesting. Welcome to the programme, Jane.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Jane, you've done so much already and had a great impact on change and evolution for the better. But can you tell us, how did you move from medicine to local government leadership? Because it's really quite a different area.
Okay, before I come to that, because actually in a funny kind of way, I didn't move from medicine to, I did both simultaneously.
Oh,
Can I just make a comment about sort of the nature of leadership? I'm thinking back particularly to my time at Camden, which was some time ago now, but it was very formative and it was an enormous honour and privilege. It was exasperating, it was fun, it was just all of those things. But I suppose one of the things I just did want to start off by saying is that the nature of leadership is inevitably shared and distributed. And that was absolutely the case in Camden. So I was very fortunate to be leader at that particular time. But I had a fabulous group of councillors in my cabinet. We had really good officers, senior officers, middle ranking and junior officers. And you know, it's very easy, I think, when one looks at leaders, and I know that now, particularly doing some academic work in leadership, is to focus on the individual. And individuals can make a difference, there's no doubt about that. But actually, they operate within an environment, and part of the job of leadership is to bring other people in so that we're all in this together. Well, that's an unfortunate phrase, isn't it? But nowadays, but it is very much about bringing other people in, and so that we're all jointly seeking the same sort of a goal. And I just think it's important to stress that. Yes,
no, very true. And I think that is definitely the mark of a true leader, when you really do bring everybody in and you try and help everybody progress so that it's better for all. Unfortunately, there seem to be too many leaders these days that it's all me.
Absolutely.
Which I can't stand. It drives me crazy. So it's lovely to hear you start with that. Okay, so yes, medicine and local government. How did you manage to do both?
Right. Well, just to explain. So as a teenager, I wanted to be a doctor, which therefore I had to read medicine. I don't think I really knew what doctors properly did. But I was always really interested in politics. I've always had this kind of track. And, you know, a leopard doesn't change his spots. And I think, looking back, I haven't much either. So I did do medicine. And I first of all trained as a paediatrician or did my first training as a paediatrician and worked in child health.
Yeah.
And then got more interested in the psychological aspects of things. So I had to train in adult psychiatry before then doing child psychiatry. But, you know, throughout I had always been interested in politics and that really went away. Although as a junior doctor, you didn't sleep very much, particularly in those days. Yeah. So it didn't allow much time to go to meetings or of any nature, really.
Yeah.
And then I became pregnant in 1989, which was a planned pregnancy, and withdrew from the shortlist of the council's selections at that time. And as it turned out, it's a long story, but as it turned out, that message hadn't been conveyed, and I was shortlisted for what was then seen as a safe Labour seat, and I couldn't quite bring myself to withdraw, and I was very clear this was going to be for one term, 4 years, that is. I'd have a baby. I was doing an MSc at the time at the Tavistock Clinic. and it would be for one term. Now, what often happens in local government, and I would really stress this to your listeners, particularly women, is, of course, endlessly fascinating, interesting. I loved it. And so at the end of the 4 years, actually, I stood again, and then it came to 1998, and I wanted to see what it would be like, under a Labour government, when actually there was more. So, to cut a long story short, completely unplanned, I'd have been astounded. 10 years after becoming a councillor in 1990, I was elected leader. And throughout all that time, I went part-time, so I was working full-time as a paediatrician and child psychiatrist, and then I got my consultant job around 93, I think it was.
Yes.
And I had worked part-time after the birth of my son. And I do feel very strongly, actually, and perhaps you can talk about this more in a while, but I do feel very strongly that being a councillor, even a leading council, even a leader, it is entirely possible to do it part-time. Because remember, you are non-executive. You are not running the show. You have, reasonably paid officers to do precisely that. And I think there's great value in having a world outside. Yes. Now, that's a popular view. It's a minority view at the moment, because actually the trend is going the other way. The other thing I would say, it does absolutely depend on there being adequate support for you as a councillor, a senior councillor, in order to make that happen. And I was very fortunate that in Camden, actually, I was well supported. We had good childcare. There was meetings were held in the evening, and of course you can change that around. And funnily enough, as leader, it was easier than when I was less senior, in the sense that if anybody wanted to have a meeting with me, then actually, I could say, well, I'm afraid I can't make that time, but I can make this time. Yes. I often knew that Mondays from 3 o'clock to 5:30 was sacrosanct, because I come up from school and his best mate, and I would always make them an apple crumble. It was crumble day.
Brilliant.
I could call the shots more in terms of having flexibility. So I would really stress that with the right support, it is not just possible, but in my view, desirable to be a councillor and a leader and a leading councillor on a not a full-time basis.
I think that sounds great. I think that sounds really, really motivating, because the fact, from two reasons. One, that you can actually do it part-time and do it well, which is great, but also the fact that you keep a normal life and a normal job outside of that, so that you still have a reality check with the real world.
Exactly right. Exactly.
I mean, I have a bee in my bonnet. I lived in France for many, many years, and one of the things that really shocked me, to do with the legal system, nothing to do with medical, but legal actually and political system, is that they go to the special university or equivalent of university to learn to be a judge or to be someone in politics. And they never actually have a real job. So they have no experience of the world. They have no idea of the challenges, the problems, the ups, the downs, the, business life, anything else. They just go straight into those jobs, and they've never seen anything normal. And I just do not see how people can either judge others in a legal system if they've never experienced normal life, or lead a country if they've never experienced normal life. So I think what you're saying is far, far better and much more intelligent for everyone to get the best of everything. I don't know why more people don't do it.
Well, I have a theory about why more people don't do it, but I strongly believe that to be the case. Actually, I wrote a piece from the Local Government Network on the blog about, do leaders have to be full-time?
Yep.
And saying very clearly that, in my view, that was not necessarily the case, as long as you get the proper support from the organisation, of course. But, I worked as a doctor throughout the time I was lead as a child psychiatrist, now 2 days a week.
Yeah.
So I did reduce, and I did condensed hours, and I worked very hard. I probably didn't sleep enough, but it is possible. And I do think that not only did I bring something about the nature of child psychiatry and child mental ill health into my understanding of the world, because actually, we know that some of the conditions in which children are brought up, leaves a lot to be desired, and I had some understanding of that. But equally, I think actually some of my training, particularly my training at the Tavistock Clinic, actually helped me to understand much better something about group dynamics in a political sphere, and particularly thinking about the nature of relationships within teams, thinking a bit about the nature of attachment and attachment theory, all of those things. Actually, I think it informed my politics for the better, I have to say.
Oh, excellent. Oh, that's great. And okay, I know you're obviously very present and dynamic in the field of local government and in social activism. So this is a pretty general question, but what do you see, and can you tell us a little more about the changing face of local government and its role in democracy? Because it is changing. Even since I've been looking at this, because I mean, I'm not a political type person, so my knowledge is very, very limited. But just from the little amount that I've looked into it, I can see changes are happening. So you, who's involved in it all the time, obviously you can see much more. So what's your view?
Well, I'm less involved, obviously, than I was on the front line.
Yeah.
But I have retained an involvement in a variety of different ways of local government. And I have to say I'm a great admirer of local government. Again, sometimes that's not a fashionable view. But I think we ignore the importance of democratic local government at our peril. Because simply it is local.
Yes.
Very awkward thing to say. But I think it's really important that we all have some understanding of how we can influence the world around us. It might be in our block of flats, it might be in our estate, it might be in the PTA at school, it might be in the local park, whatever it is. Actually, we know that lots and lots of people are interested in what goes on around them and don't like some things that happen or have ideas to make things better. Well, how do you do that? Well, actually, you give voice to that. You try and lobby for resource. And that is a political small p. I'm not talking about party politics now. It's a small p, but a political activity. And often all the polls show the women, inverted commas, don't like politics. And I kind of think that probably means the shouty party politics of Prime Minister's Question Time in the Commons. But actually, it's women who are involved at a local level in changing things, which is about politics. So I think local government is really powerful, as potential for enormous there, because it represents place, the place where you live. It stands for that place, and all the things that goes to contribute that. It's local history, the geography of it. Even as one person said to me, the geology, which of course is true. The culture, the different peoples that live there. It's the role of local government to give voice to all of those different voices, not all of whom inevitably will agree, because we don't agree with one another. And so, if you like, it's a fundamental pillar of government, small g, how we govern ourselves and how we live together in society and reconcile our differences of view and get things done. And gives an expression to our voice. So I think the trends that we've had in the UK, certainly over the last century, increasing centralisation into Whitehall, is profoundly, profoundly mistaken. Because it becomes more remote, becomes more disengaged, and inevitably, not because people in Whitehall are bad people, they're not. But, that different places are different and require different things. So clearly you need a national framework, and at a broad strategic level, of course you need to have good government that recognises, nationally what's going on and sets national frameworks and some standards. But actually, I'm very much in the camp that we do need to reinvigorate local government, because it has enormous strengths. Now, I look back at my time now, and we thought we were short of money then. But, I really feel for local authorities now, many of whom have had 40 to 50% cuts in their budget. And that's really
as much as that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And people have no idea, because actually, when it's the shore starts sort of closing, or the youth centres, that actually comes from that. The costs of social care, of course, is the big one with enormous demand, and children's social care, and local authorities quite rightly are prioritising that because they need to do that. But it does mean that everything else suffers. So I really feel for people on the front line now, because it's really tough out there, and yet at the same time it's incredibly important to the quality of life that we all can have.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know enough about it, and I've only moved back from France about 6 months ago, so I really am out of touch. But the thing that I feel is necessary, and I think I'm sort of blurring the borders between government and local government, but I think the main focus has to be on health before anything, then policing, and then education. With all the ramifications around them. And it seems to me that what's suffering the most at the moment, and this is very much a distant view just from headlines in the newspaper, and I think a lot of those aren't very accurate, but it seems to be that the NHS and everything to do with care and care of older people, care of people with mental health issues, anything like that, there just isn't enough attention to it. And I think that carries over into the community, because I remember when my parents were first getting ill with Alzheimer's and things like that, we investigated all the different types of care that was available. And it seems to me that then, because we're going back 15, 20 years, it seems to me that then there was more support and more possibilities than there is now. And I know with policing, there definitely isn't the same as there used to be, because it seems that police no longer come out to small crimes. And education, I'm not convinced that a lot is being done to improve education. So I don't know whether I'm getting the wrong end of the stick with it, but it seems that those are definitely things that have suffered from the cuts. And those, I think, are also where local government could have at least an influence, not necessarily that they've got the funding to do everything necessary, but they could have more influence in promoting those type of things.
More than that, I think that local government actually has more than just an influence in promoting. If you look at the things you mentioned, about health, police and education, all of which are incredibly important, I completely agree, but actually major determinants of health, and I say this as someone who has worked in the National Health Service for all of my career, regularly until a couple of years ago, and I'm still an honorary consultant in the North London Hospital. Major determinants of health are not what happens in the National Health Service. And I'm a great proponent of the NHS. Actually, the major determinants of health are all of those things for which local government has a direct responsibility, albeit sometimes not from a statutory point of view. It is about road conditions, about speed limits, about the quality of the physical environment. All sorts of things. And actually, basically, it's also about inequality, which again the local government can have an influence on. So and in policing, of course, it was known that many police forces have been very significantly cut, but there's an enormous amount that local government and police working together, community safety partnerships, the more preventative side of things, are really powerful. And one of the reasons, of course, that we are seeing increases in demand is a lot of that early preventative stuff, early stage stuff that's been cut. Sure Start, I think, it's fantastic introduction, and that has been really pared down to the bone. So, and then of course, then you are reliant on the services at the top end, whether it's in the National Health Service, whether it's in the criminal justice system, and it's profoundly short-sighted in my view.
You are listening to Anna Letitia Cook at Women Up Radio.
I know you mentioned about women and women in politics, which obviously I'm very interested in that aspect. So do you think that the place of women in local government and politics is more accessible these days? And do you think women want to have more access? Because a lot of people say, oh no, women in politics, blah, 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 and they're quite negative about it. But I agree with your point that women really do have a lot of involvement and a lot to give. So what do you think's happening on that front?
Well, in terms of elected political office, then clearly there have been advances over the last predominantly 20 plus years. I guess there have been advances. I have to say but I think there's evidence it's plateauing now. And I have got to the point at which I am really impatient. So and I've got more hard-nosed about it, I think, because,
everyone needs to take cover.
Well, so, and it's quite interesting because actually, if you look around the world, the places where they have the best representation of women is where there are new systems. So at one point, it was in Rwanda that had because it was a new system. You look at Wales, that actually when the Welsh Assembly was brought into being, the Labour Party, which is, I suppose, the dominant party in Wales, introduced a twinning system, but actually, in 1999 produced 50% women Welsh Assembly members. Whereas Westminster, of course, all that tradition, it has lots and lots of advantages, but one of the major disadvantages is it takes forever for anything to change, and so it seems in local government it's never been more than around a third or so of councillors have been women. I mean, paltry 17% are leaders. 17% of local authority leaders, directly elected mayors, there are 7 of them, all are white men.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. And actually the major issue is not in election, it's selection. So it goes back to the political parties that actually, if you field women out there as candidates, actually some evidence they're more likely to win.
Yes.
But so we've got to the point where, people have been banging on about this for over the last, there have been a succession of reports from the mid-1990s and probably before that, on candidate selection, representation of women, black and minority ethnic communities on local government. I chaired one from 2007 to 2009. The Fawcett Society came out with one last year. Excellent report. But actually, I kind of wrote a piece at the time. Deeply disheartening because we all come up with the same recommendations and everybody goes yes and nobody does anything.
Oh, really?
I'm being a bit sweeping, but actually, there's a great reluctance to bring about change. Yeah. And actually, I think we have to recognise it's in ourselves, if you like, that we all of us do this. It's very easy. The tendency is to recruit in our own likeness.
Yes.
And we have to recognise that is perhaps a natural tendency, and therefore very consciously reach out to find people who are different from us.
Yep.
And actually, there's a great reluctance to do that. And one of the reasons of great reluctance to do that, because of course, is that turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So if you are currently in a position of influence and of power in order to change something, you have by and large got there because the system as it is set up suits you very well. Thank you very much.
Yep.
And it's not because people are malevolent or think this through at a conscious level, but actually in practice, that's what happens. If you have been served well by the system in which you have come up, then why on earth would you want to change it?
Yes.
Yeah. And part of that is it's work that I've done, perhaps we'll talk about later, the research that I've done, is people don't want to let go. I found it exquisitely difficult to step down from being leader of Camden. I loved the role.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to walk away from positions of influence. I get that. I'm really sympathetic. Yeah. But, you just have to say your time's up.
Yeah, I mean, I know, well, you've written a book about that, Losing Political Office, which I think sounds very, very interesting, because people rarely take into consideration what actually happens when somebody leaves political office. So whether it's to the person themselves or the people around them. So what have you learned from that? What happens? How does it evolve? What's the next step?
Okay, well, what I did, I was intrigued for all sorts of reasons, actually, partly my own experience, but not just that. I was intrigued at how silent public debate is about when politicians lose office. So I'm just curious. I assumed there would be literature out there and I could just pull the literature together and learn from that. And actually, to my astonishment, I found there was relatively little.
Oh, really?
I was really surprised. There was a bit of work on MPs from the Leeds group, Kevin Theakston. There's some work internationally. Most of it actually came from US presidents, and even then, it talked about what they went on to do, or not, as the case may be. But there was very, very, very little about what was that experience of leaving office like, and at a human level, let alone what the wider implications might be. So I conducted a research study, a kosher research study, where I conducted 41 interviews in total. I interviewed former MPs and former council leaders. There was no work. And in fact, my work is the only work, I think, to date in local government. Former council leaders, former MPs, and who had left office, and also a sample of those who are still in office. And where possible, of the former MPs and former council leaders, I interviewed their partners as well at the time when they left office.
Yeah.
And I didn't intend to write a book, actually. I intended to write an academic paper.
Yeah.
I suppose there was such a mine of human experience that it grew and grew and grew until it became a book. And essentially what I found is that nobody is at all interested in what happens when politicians leave office, because actually excitement of, the media spotlight, it all disappears. So people lose everything, often income as well, all that income, friendship group, status, influence, being the centre of attention, a structure to the day, and crucially, of course, a lot about their identity. It all goes pretty much overnight, particularly if you're defeated, and particularly if you're defeated unexpectedly. And not all, but actually for both those who stood down and those who were defeated, so not just those who were defeated, actually there was a lot of grief. I mean, I use that word advisedly.
Yeah.
Because it is such a loss of all these things that are important to you, your values, your beliefs that you've cherished over years, mattering. And suddenly nobody's interested. Just not interested. Now, not everybody has that sort of a reaction. For those MPs, actually it was MPs more than council leaders, there were some MPs who just hated being an MP, and actually for them it was much more of a relief. But for council leaders, but for council leaders, all of whom, the ones I talked to, just loved the role, and of course they often could manage it with other bits of their life. But actually, it's a profound loss. So whether whether there were reasons to move on or not, whether you stood down or not, just have to acknowledge that it is a significant loss. But of course, nobody acknowledges that. So particularly those who were defeated, those MPs, they were in kind of at the count photographs, cameras flashing all over the place, and then the next week, silent. And often, not always, the National Party leader, there'd be no contact. Nobody would acknowledge that loss. They would sort of drop like a stone. I mean, out of sight, out of mind, literally. And of course, if you're an MP, then, or certainly if you're a council leader, there's no help in terms of how do you do CVs, how do you interview skills, what could you go on to do? Because all these people have acquired all sorts of skills. Which actually they could transfer into other roles, whether in paid employment, whether in civic roles. But it's not acknowledged the sort of skills that they have acquired. And frankly, nobody is interested. And for some of the council leaders and a lot of the MPs, particularly if they've not been senior, really struggle to find any job at all. So the idea that people waltz, the MPs waltz into another job just like that and earn vast sums of money is completely erroneous. And that's borne out by the studies as well. And for council leaders, particularly if they've done it full time, it's another reason why I think council leaders are ill-advised to always do it full time. But nobody knows what they do. It's really hard for them sometimes to get other employment, because they had all their eggs in one basket. And
it's just so sad. I mean, I'd never thought of that. You're absolutely right. Nobody thinks about it.
Because council leaders don't even get the statutory minimum redundancy pay.
Really? Oh, good God.
So they are absolutely stranded in those situations.
And particularly after spending however many years they've been doing it, helping everybody around them and doing it, to help others. I mean, that must be a real kick in the teeth. It must be awful.
Exactly. I think that's how some people described it, as a kick in the teeth.
Oh God. No, I'm going to read your book now. I have to say, it's fine. That's very interesting, because a lot of identity, whether you're a council leader, an MP, or a director in a company, or whatever, a lot of your own psychological well-being is totally associated with your identity and how you see yourself.
Oh, absolutely. If politics is very much like that. A bit like the army, the clergy. Quite a lot of people I talked about as a vocation, and there's writing on that as well. And it is absolutely that. And I suppose the other thing I went on to become really interested in is that, so I found all of these things from a purely human level, how badly we treat these people, really, really badly at a human level. But actually, I'm suggesting that there are wider implications from that. That not only do we waste the skills and the knowledge and experience of these people, which just seems to be foolish, but actually there's a lot that can be done in terms of promoting understanding of democracy. But actually, because of all of this, if we make it too difficult for politicians to leave office because it's too risky, why would you consign yourself to oblivion in those circumstances if you didn't really have to? Then actually we make it too difficult to leave. And so you actually get people staying in office, some people perhaps a bit longer than they otherwise might. And that, of course, then the whole system begins to silt up and you have less access into MP or to be a leading councillor. It has many wider implications that I think we would be wise to think more about. And that's an argument I begin in the book and then I develop in a paper that came out this year, actually, in British Politics.
Definitely, because you need movement, you need new thoughts, you need new energy. Otherwise, it just gets too static. Okay, can I just ask you, obviously you've done a lot of research when you were doing the book Losing Political Office. Now, in my mind, I would think that there must be some kind of parallels occasionally between political leadership and also corporate or business leadership. So does your research show any particular trends or specifics regarding losing office? And is there any way that you could compare this to executives losing their job, whether it's voluntary or they're being pushed out?
I think there are lots of parallels. And as a result of that, I did look at the retirement literature and redundancy literature in the private sector and in the public sector. And essentially, I think what we're looking, whether it's in the world of appointed work or in political office, is that jobs generally are becoming more and more specialised. Now, that has all sorts of implications because it means that, particularly within politics, of course, then if you lose political office, it's more difficult to go back from whence you've come. So if you're a doctor, as I am, or a lawyer, that actually the world of law and medicine is becoming ever more specialised. So if you leave it for any period of time, then inevitably you are less up to date and it's more difficult to go back. So I think there's a different... And you see in the corporate sector, I mean, the retirement redundancy, you see many of the same things. And lots of business schools, actually, there's a lot of writing about the effect of retirement and redundancy, not just on the individuals, but actually on the organisation as well. But for chief executives, there's some really good writing about how hard it is when you lose that job. Suddenly, all the same things that you no longer matter in the same way. It's seen as a failure. You're seen as tainted goods. You lose the structure of the day, you lose your identity, particularly if you are a very busy chief executive, working all hours of the day, and of course sometimes not seeing as much of your family as you might like to. So actually they're quite happy doing other things now when you lose your job and you need them most. So there's all sorts of parallels there. I have argued, though, that politicians have an additional challenge in the sense that they have a very direct relationship with their electorate because they're voted in. And when they're voted out, then it is a very direct, we don't like you anymore. But to some extent, when chairman of companies or chief executives lose the confidence of their shareholders, then actually, again, it's something about the nature of the relationship. They're saying very clearly, we don't want you anymore. We're not interested in you anymore. Just go. And that's very difficult for any individual to hear.
So I know that you're very interested in what local government can do for the betterment of its place and what it does already. And I'm interested particularly in women's roles within this.
So local government, I praise enormously because I think it's something about the leadership of place. Now, clearly, there are lots of different, in any one place, there will be business leaders, there'll be civic leaders, there'll be all sorts of other leaders. And actually the job in local government, I think, is if you like, you represent your place, you have the stewardship of that place. And by virtue of having been democratically elected, you have more legitimacy from a democratic point of view than perhaps, the leaders of health trusts, the universities, the FE colleges, the schools and all the rest of it, but actually really recognising all of those other leaders in that patch, that actually there are difficult problems that you can't solve just by a council, and you've never been able to actually, that you do have to join forces with the other leaders in that patch, in that place, to really have a good sense of, well, what are the issues that we need to deal with here? Both in terms of tackling difficult problems, wicked problems, both in terms of delivery of public services, about giving democratic voice to people, about whether it's stimulating economic growth together with social policy. So there's a great deal of, I think, that local government can do, even in these constrained times, actually, a great deal. And you even need to look at, how different planning authorities differ to see actually what differences that makes to the physical environment and the social environment. So I think there's an enormous amount that local government still can do. It needs to be agile, it needs to be responsive, but there's a great deal it can do. Now, women in that, I think local government is a fantastic opportunity for women, from sort of a practical point of view, but also, 50% of the population are women, and it just seems to me frankly ludicrous in some parts of the country that we have cabinets that have either no women or very, very few, or as I was saying, we have 17% women leaders, because in principle it's really important, and from a logistical point of view as well, that actually you can organise, things can be organised in a council, such as to encourage women to be part of that, whether they have domestic responsibilities, whether they're working, whether they're doing both. Now, but it does mean that people who are currently in positions of power need to do things like to go out and ask people if they'd like to stand, because most people have no idea how things work at a local level. They don't know quite what a CCG is, a clinical commissioning group. They don't know, is that the same as a council? Is it different? Who collects a bit? So I think there's a job to be done by local government, is actually some explanation. There's tons of information out there, but nobody actually joins up the dots. In your particular borough or in your town or in your village, how does stuff work? What's the responsibility of the parish versus the district versus the county? Why do we have all those three tiers in those places? So at the very first instance, for young people, we're lamentable in this country in terms of any sort of political education, small p, about how democracy works, not about party politics, but party politics are a part of that, and explaining it in a non-partisan way seems to me really important. So people need to understand how it works in order to put themselves forward. But then actually lots of evidence that people who are less confident, that actually people who are in office currently say, I think you'll be great as a councillor. Have you ever thought about that? People who are active in TAs, people who are active in the community. Have you thought about extending that a bit? And then when they do get elected, is actually making sure the conditions are right such that you can support them in that role. I was in one place which will remain nameless, but when it became a unitary, having been a county and a district, they lost their female councillors because all the meetings that had been in the evening were suddenly put at 4 o'clock or put in the day. And I said, but hang on a bit, you have some choice over that. You can organise when you have your meetings a bit more flexibly. And I was told, oh no, our members get tired by 4 o'clock. Now, this is all member cabinet, all male cabinets. Now, all retired. There's a proper, I'm now retired from the NHS, although I'm not retired from work. It's really important to hear from older people and retired people, but not exclusively. What you want is a balance. And arguably, actually, in some places in London, we need more retired people rather than fewer, because the balance is shifted to lots and lots of young people in their 20s. I want to encourage more young people in the 20s, but you want a balance on any council. You want a balance of people of ages, of ethnic background, gender, different backgrounds in terms of class. People don't talk about class, but socioeconomic is really, really important. And you want a balance that is sort of more represents your local patch.
So, any last recommendations or anything that you think should happen? Any last comments you'd like to make on the situation at the moment?
My only comment, I think, would be we've stalled as far as women's representation is concerned from a political point of view, and I think that's reflected, I believe, in the corporate sector as well. And I I do think there's a point at which people have just got to be a lot more hard-nosed about it. And actually, I understand why people object to, for example, quotas, but actually sometimes you do need something quite clunky in order to bring about change, or what they did in Wales to begin with, that you twin the constituencies. One of the things we advocated was term limits, very long term limits for councillors. Well, you'd have thought that kind of world had come to an end, that we had the temerity to suggest that after 20 years it might be time to stand down. There are some advantages, some disadvantages in term limits, and I acknowledge that. But if we could achieve that cultural change, as people have that sense of you come into serve in political office for a period of time and then you go. There's a more fluid system that is easier to access. You're well supported when you're there, but then crucially, you don't make it the whole of your career. You do have an association with outside life, and you go back into whatever job or profession from whence you came. I think that would open up opportunities for elected office to a much wider range of people, and the culture would be better, just as you were saying, is that people would have more connection with other worlds. We'd open up the opportunities for more people to stand for political office, which surely would be an advantage for us all. It would benefit us all.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much. Jane, thank you so much for coming on the programme today. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you, and it's been really interesting learning so much more about public leadership, the evolution, women's place, and the evolution of local government. So thank you very much.
A great pleasure. Thank you very much.
We'd like to thank our guest, Jane Roberts, DBE, councillor, council leader, chair of NLGN, and medical doctor and hospital consultant, for sharing her expertise on women in public leadership and the evolution of local government. I'm Anna Letitia Cook. You've been listening to us at Women Up Radio. Thanks also to Mara Guzel and Laura Martinez of UN Women's Empower Women for the wonderful work that they do to advance the case for women's equality today. And a big thank you to all of you who are listening in. I hope you've enjoyed hearing Jane. Please send in any questions or feedback to us. You can find our social media and contact details through our website, womenup.global/radio.
Women Up Radio, designed to facilitate women's empowerment, improve your career, develop your talents, incorporate your passions, achieve fulfillment and success.